The 20 most surprising facts about Pope Leo XIV. Number 20. His mother was a librarian and his father a war veteran. Pope Leo XIV was born into a family that, although it held no noble titles or political power, was deeply marked by the value of knowledge and service. His mother, Mildred Martinez, was a librarian who graduated from DePaul University in Chicago, a discreet but formidable woman, a lover of books and the silence that safeguards knowledge. It was she who instilled in the young Robert Francis Prevost a respect for reading, methodical study, and intellectual contemplation. In his home, his mother's library was not just a collection of bookshelves. It was a domestic sanctuary where the written word was venerated and debated. Many testimonies from his surroundings assure that it was there, among novels, biographies, and tomes of Christian philosophy, that the silent vocation that would later lead him to the priesthood was born. His father, Louis Marius Prevost, was a U.S. Navy veteran and later a school principal in the Illinois school system. His wartime experience didn't harden him, but rather tempered his sense of discipline, justice, and responsibility. He spoke to his son about the dangers of the world, not to frighten him, but to teach him the importance of living with purpose and commitment. From him, he inherited sobriety, strength of character, and an uncompromising work ethic that would later be recognized in his work as a missionary, bishop, cardinal, and, finally, pope. The combination of these two worlds, the quiet wisdom of his mother and the ethical strength of his father, forged the man who occupies the chair of St. Peter today. The memory of a librarian and a soldier still beats in the heart of the Catholic Church's most recent pontiff. Number 19. He has a personal collection of antique St. Augustine books. Among the most valuable objects he kept throughout his life, Pope Leo XIV possesses a private collection of antiquarian books and rare editions of the works of St. Augustine, the church father who most influenced his thought and spirituality. This collection, which he began to build in his youth as an Augustinian student, is not just a collection of leather-bound texts with worn covers. It is a living testimony to his love for patristic wisdom and the philosophical depth of early Christianity. Many of these editions were acquired in used bookstores in Rome, Lima, and Chicago, and others were given to him by brothers of his order in recognition of his devotion and constant study. For him, each book represents an intimate dialogue with the Doctor of Hippo, a spiritual conversation that has accompanied him at every stage of his religious life. The most prized volumes in his personal library include 18th century Latin editions of the Confessions, as well as St. Augustine's treatises on grace, human freedom, and the city of God. Some of these works contain marginal notes, written by Leo XIV himself during his formative years, handwritten reflections that reveal his theological sensitivity and his fascination with the inner drama of the soul. On more than one occasion, he has confessed that rereading St. Augustine helped him discern difficult decisions, both as provincial, as prior general, and later as bishop. Today, as pontiff, he maintains this collection not as a symbol of prestige, but as an intellectual and spiritual refuge. Amid the responsibilities of governing the universal church, he frequently returns to these texts, seeking in them the same answers that moved the young Augustine more than 1,600 years ago. Number 18. He was editor of the school yearbook and student leader. Long before he donned the Augustinian habit, or was called to serve as a bishop and cardinal, young Robert Francis Prevost already stood out in the school halls as a natural leadership figure. During his years of secondary education at the Augustinian Minor Seminary in Illinois, he was not only a disciplined and diligent student, but also a creative and proactive young man. It was precisely at this stage that he took on the role of editor of the school yearbook, a role that, in his case, was much more than an academic task. Under his direction, the yearbook ceased to be a simple compendium of photographs and events and became a true living chronicle of the student community. He personally reviewed texts, corrected styles, proposed topics for reflection, and ensured that each edition had a central message that transcended the anecdotal. This role allowed him to develop skills from a very young age that would later be fundamental in his ecclesiastical life: attentive listening, the ability to synthesize, the art of narrating with truth and beauty, and above all, his commitment to his community, But his role was not limited to editing publications. He was also elected president of the Student Council, an organization that represented the interests of the student body and coordinated spiritual, cultural, and social activities. Many of his classmates remember him as a respected, serene leader with a special talent for uniting young people of different sensibilities around common projects. His leadership was exercised quietly, but firmly. Years later, when he was appointed superior of the Augustinians and later appointed bishop, many affirmed that that sober and approachable style was already evident in the young editor who, unknowingly, was beginning to write the first lines of a vocation that would lead him to the papacy. Number 17. He taught mathematics and physics before becoming a priest. Before fully entering religious life, Pope Leo XIV, then known as the young Robert Prevost, served as a professor of mathematics and physics, a little-known but profoundly formative period in his intellectual and personal journey. After completing his bachelor's degree in mathematics at Villanova University, an Augustinian institution in Pennsylvania, he was invited to teach at educational institutions affiliated with the order. His classes were not limited to transmitting formulas or solving equations. They were spaces where logical thinking, scientific curiosity, and the search for truth through reason were fostered. His students of that time remember him as a passionate, demanding, yet fair professor who knew how to relate physical principles to broader questions about the existence and order of the universe. This period left an indelible mark on his worldview. The precision of mathematical language and the rigor of the scientific method taught him to value clarity, order, and coherence, qualities he carried over into his theological training years later. On more than one occasion, both as a bishop and later as a cardinal, he cited analogies between the structure of physical thought and the structure of Christian doctrine. For him, faith and reason are not enemies, but complementary dimensions of the human soul. His ability to integrate diverse knowledge, from geometry to the thought of St. Augustine, from Newtonian physics to the theology of grace, has been recognized both within and outside the ecclesiastical sphere. In a world increasingly fragmented between spirituality and science, Pope Leo XIV represents a rare example of living synthesis, someone who, before preaching from the pulpit, knew how to teach from the blackboard with the same rigor, humility, and vocation for service. Number 16. He is of sub-Saharan African descent. One of the most significant and often least known aspects of Pope Leo XIV is his diverse family heritage, which includes sub-Saharan African roots on his maternal side. His mother, Mildred Martinez, descends from an old Creole family from New Orleans, whose genealogy interweaves Spanish, French, and African-American origins. This ancestry, with deep cultural and spiritual roots, gives the current pontiff a living connection to a historical heritage marked by resilience, faith, and dignity in the face of centuries of marginalization. As a child, Leo XIV heard stories from grandmothers and aunts who spoke with pride of their ancestors, many of them enslaved in past generations but deeply committed to the church, education, and sacred music. This collective memory, woven into prayers, songs, and silences, left a profound spiritual mark on him. This legacy has not been an anecdotal detail in his life, but a source of identity and conscience. During his years as a missionary in Peru, and as prior general of the Augustinians, he was known for his ability to understand the suffering of marginalized peoples and for his empathy toward historically excluded communities. He has spoken publicly, albeit discreetly, about structural racism in society and within the church itself, calling for a conversion that is not only theological but also cultural. Upon assuming the papacy, he became the first pontiff of sub-Saharan African descent in centuries, something that has resonated, especially in communities of African descent in the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. Although he rarely emphasizes this aspect, those who know him know that he carries in his blood a history of struggle, faith, and hope that now, from the throne of Peter, continues to be written with the silent dignity of his ancestors. Number 15. He is a polyglot. Pope Leo XIV is fluent in several languages, an ability that reflects not only his rigorous academic training, but also his deep missionary and pastoral vocation. He speaks English, Spanish, Italian, and French fluently, and has a working knowledge of Latin, Portuguese, and German. This linguistic ability was not the product of superficial learning or belated diplomatic demands, but a tool he cultivated from a young age with care and dedication. Upon entering the Order of St Augustine and living in international communities, he discovered that language is not only a means of communication, but a bridge to the soul of others. His fluency in Spanish was acquired from his early years as a missionary in Chulucanas, Peru, where he lived closely with rural, peasant, and indigenous communities, developing a special sensitivity to the cultural nuances of every verbal expression. As Prior General of the Augustinians, a position he held for 12 years, this ability was essential for leading global meetings, writing multilingual documents, and establishing direct relationships with religious from all continents without the need for interpreters. But beyond its practical purpose, Leo XIV has stated on more than one occasion that speaking another language also implies thinking from the heart of the other. In his current role as Supreme Pontiff, this understanding has become an invaluable pastoral tool. When addressing the faithful from different countries, he avoids generalizations or convoluted discourse. He strives to speak in the language of his audience, aware that each word spoken in the language of the heart has a deeper impact. His polyglotism is not a cultural embellishment, but a concrete expression of his universal vocation, which connects him directly, humbly, and intimately with the people who today look to the Vatican with hope. Number 14. He was Prior General of the Augustinians for 12 years. Before holding episcopal office or receiving the dignity of Cardinal, Pope Leo XIV was elected Prior General of the Order of St Augustine, a responsibility he held for 12 years between 2001 and 2013. This was a key period in his life and in the recent history of his congregation. The election of Robert Prevost as the highest authority of the Augustinians, an order present in more than 40 countries, marked the beginning of a tenure characterized by fraternal closeness, pastoral renewal, and fidelity to the spirit of St. Augustine. He was not an office administrator, but a constant pilgrim. He visited communities in Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America, engaging directly with religious in their real-life contexts, addressing community crises, promoting vocations, and accompanying regions in conflict with discretion and firmness. During his tenure, he implemented reforms in the formation processes, encouraged contextualized theological study, and promoted interculturality as a spiritual enrichment, not an obstacle. He was a leader who knew how to combine demand with tenderness, structure with listening. Under his leadership, the order experienced a new vocational drive in traditionally peripheral areas, such as Vietnam, Nigeria, and Bolivia. He also strengthened the order's internal communication, promoting global encounters that transcended administrative matters to become authentic experiences of communion. His leadership style, always more collegial than authoritarian, left an indelible mark on generations of religious who today see him as a model of horizontal governance and incarnated spirituality. The experience acquired during those 12 years not only prepared him for greater responsibilities, but also cemented the universal and pastoral vision that today characterizes his pontificate. Number 13. He obtained Peruvian citizenship in 2015. Although he was born in Chicago and is American by origin, Pope Leo XIV also holds Peruvian citizenship, officially granted in 2015, in recognition of his missionary dedication and his deep connection with the Peruvian people. This was not a diplomatic formality or a symbolic gesture. It was the natural result of decades of shared life, pastoral service, and sincere love for a land that welcomed and transformed him. His arrival in Peru dates back to the 1980s, when he was sent as an Augustinian missionary to the Diocese of Chulucanas in the north of the country. There, in a region marked by structural poverty, political instability, and social tensions, Robert Prevost humbly immersed himself in the communities, learning not only the language, but also the idiosyncrasies, suffering, and faith of the Peruvian people. For more than a decade, he walked through dusty villages, celebrated masses under zinc roofs, organized catechism classes with rural leaders, and defended the rights of marginalized communities. Years later, when he was appointed bishop of that same diocese, Peruvian citizenship was not seen as a reward, but as a way to formalize what was already evident to all, that his heart and vocation also belonged to Peru. In more than one interview, he has said that Peru re-educated him in the gospel, teaching him to serve from a place of fragility and tenderness. To this day, he retains expressions from popular northern speech, vividly remembers local foods, and maintains communication with many families who continue to call him Father Bob. His Peruvian citizenship represents not only a legal identity, but also a testimony of mission, incarnation, and mutual love between a pastor and his people. Number 12. He was nicknamed the Saint of the North in Peru. During his years of pastoral service in the Diocese of Chulucanas in northern Peru, Robert Francis Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, unintentionally received a nickname that spoke more of his life testimony than any ecclesiastical title, the Saint of the North. The nickname was not coined by authorities or the official press, but by the simple people of rural towns, indigenous communities, and marginalized areas who knew him closely. Amidst the violence of the Shining Path, the economic crises, and the state's neglect of the region, his presence became a symbol of consolation, justice, and hope. He was not a distant bishop. He was the one who walked on foot under the scorching sun, who slept on humble mattresses, who listened patiently and wept with those who wept. His slight figure, with its calm gait, began to be associated with the silent holiness of those who live for others. Unlike other public figures who seek prominence, he cultivated a discreet, unassuming spirituality focused on true service. He cared for the sick, accompanied young people in their crises, defended farmers against extractive interests, and spent entire nights praying in small adobe chapels. It was precisely this coherence between what he preached and what he lived that led to his reverential call, in the mouths of the people, the Saint of the North. Although he always rejected this title out of humility, he admitted that it moved him deeply. On one occasion, he said that if anything in his life inspired faith in others, he should thank the grace of God and the people who taught him to be a pastor. Today, from Rome, that memory lives on among those who still remember him not only as a bishop, but as a saint in slippers, with a Bible in hand and an open heart. Number 11. He has an influencer goddaughter in Peru. In the midst of his intense pastoral work in northern Peru, Robert Francis Prevost, who years later would be elected Pope Leo XIV, forged deeply personal bonds with many families from poor communities, to whom he not only offered sacraments but also daily accompaniment. One of those bonds gave rise to a relationship that few could imagine in the context of a pontiff. One of his goddaughters, whom he baptized in a small parish in Chulucanas in the 1990s, has become a well-known Peruvian influencer. Today dedicated to creating social media content on spirituality, lifestyle, and social activism, this young woman has shared in various interviews the influence her godfather had on her worldview and commitment to others. From a very young age, she called him Father Bob and remembers him as a joyful, wise, and deeply caring man. Their relationship did not end with a simple sacramental ceremony. Over the years, they kept in touch through letters, emails, and occasional calls, even after he was transferred to Rome. She has recounted that she discussed many of her life's most important decisions with him, and that his approach to communication, close, authentic, compassionate, was shaped by the teachings she received in her childhood. Although he never sought publicity or notoriety, this unexpected connection has become a symbol of how his impact transcended temples and offices to reach the hearts of new generations. Today, through her social media account, this young woman continues to share messages of faith, justice, and hope, and she makes no secret of her pride in knowing that her godfather is now Pope Leo XIV. In a hypermediated world, this bond represents a unique fusion of tradition and modernity between the intimate and the universal. Number 10. He played at being a priest as a child. From his childhood on the south side of Chicago, Robert Francis Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, already showed signs of a deep vocation that, though still undefined, sprang up spontaneously in his imagination and in his games. According to his siblings and neighbors, one of his favorite pastimes was organizing small masses in his living room, using a white towel as a tablecloth, a toy cup as a chalice, and folded sheets of paper as if they were missals. He invited his cousins, neighborhood friends, and even his parents to participate as faithful, while he delivered readings he had heard at the local parish, imitating the priest with a seriousness that belied his young age. This game became a beloved custom in his home, to the point that his mother, a librarian, began lending him illustrated books about the lives of the saints and the parables of the gospel. As he grew older, that playful inclination transformed into a clearer, though never prematurely forced, inner desire. In his adolescence, he served as an altar boy at St. Joseph Parish, where he volunteered to assist with liturgical celebrations. He watched every gesture attentively, the way the priest consecrated the bread, the way he spoke to the faithful, the reverence before the altar. Those impressions left an indelible mark on his soul. He never forgot the emotion he felt when ringing the bells during the consecration, or when lighting the altar candles before Mass. Today, as pontiff, he remembers those years not as mere childish games, but as the first seeds of a vocation that grew in silence, guided by his family's faith and by an intuition that, since childhood, led him, time and again, to play what, unknowingly, would end up being his destiny. Number 9. He founded a pro-life group at the university. During his undergraduate years at the prestigious Villanova University, Robert Francis Prevost was not limited to being a brilliant student in the field of mathematical sciences. He also stood out for his ethical and social commitment in a time of intense debates about human rights, social justice, and bioethics. It was there, in the midst of classrooms and libraries, that he and other classmates founded a pro-life student group whose mission was to promote a culture of respect for life from conception to natural death. Far from adopting a merely ideological stance, the group he founded sought to create spaces for dialogue, academic training, and support for students facing profound moral dilemmas. He organized talks with experts, awareness-raising campaigns on campus, and prayer gatherings, combining intellectual reflection with pastoral action. For young Robert, defending life was not a political issue, but a profoundly theological and human one. In his personal writings from that time, some preserved by former classmates, his conviction that every human life possesses an inviolable dignity was already evident, not because society dictates it, but because it is a gift from God. This university experience marked a turning point in his vocational journey, as it allowed him to integrate his academic training with an increasingly keen moral conscience. Years later, as a bishop and then as prefect of the Dicastery for bishops, he maintained a firm but compassionate stance on issues related to the defense of life, advocating for a pastoral approach that combines truth, mercy, and accompaniment. That small student initiative, born of deep convictions, was one of the first visible signs of a leadership that today, as Pope Leo XIV, manifests itself with the same clarity and consistency. Number 8. He was known as Bob in his youth. Before his name was spoken in Latin from the central balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, before he became Pope Leo XIV, he was simply Bob. That's what his family, his neighborhood friends in Chicago, his college classmates, and the Augustinian brothers who watched him grow in religious life called him. Bob wasn't just an affectionate nickname derived from Robert. It was the way those around him identified him. Approachable, accessible, always willing to listen or lend a hand. In the halls of Villanova University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in mathematics, Bob was a thoughtful and reserved young man, but also known for his subtle sense of humor and his ability to build community. He never put himself above anyone, even when he excelled academically or assumed leadership responsibilities. He was the kind of person who knew when to speak, when to be silent, and when to invite everyone for coffee after class. That nickname stayed with him even in Peru, when he arrived as an Augustinian missionary in the Chulucanas region. Amidst the heat, the dust of the roads, and extreme poverty, Bob was the name by which hundreds of farmers and children knew him, never feeling distant from him. He wasn't Father Prevost or the American. He was Bob, the one who sat on the ground to eat with them, the one who learned words in Quechua, and the one who never complained about anything. Although today his identity as Pope demands formality and protocol, those who truly know him assure that, beneath the pontiff's white robes, the same simple heart of the young Bob still beats, who dreamed of serving, never imagining that one day he would take the helm of the universal church. That name, simple and warm, remains for many a key to the human soul of Pope Leo XIV. Number 7. He is a fan of the Chicago White Sox and Chicago-style pizza. Behind the solemn figure of Pope Leo XIV lies a man deeply rooted in his hometown, Chicago. And like any good son of that metropolis, he carries in his heart 2 centuries-old loves that connect him to his childhood, his family, and his cultural identity, the Chicago White Sox and Chicago-style pizza. From a very young age, Robert Francis Prevost used to attend games at the iconic Comiskey Park Stadium with his father, where he spent entire afternoons surrounded by baseball gloves, hot dogs, and cheers from the fans. Although his religious vocation would take him years later to other places and other commitments, he never stopped following his team's seasons, even when he was on a mission in Peru or working in Rome. In informal interviews, he has confessed that he still keeps a classic White Sox cap tucked away in one of his suitcases, as a symbol of a passion that transcends borders. But if there's anything he evokes with even greater nostalgia, it's Chicago-style pizza: thick, crispy crust, abundant sauce, and generous amounts of cheese. It was the dish shared at home during family celebrations, gatherings with friends, and university study nights. Even when he lived in religious communities, he often prepared his homemade version, surprising his fellow believers with his culinary talent and his enthusiasm for keeping the traditions of his homeland alive. Today, at Casa Santa Marta, where he resides as pontiff, he has requested on more than one occasion a recipe inspired by that pizza as a simple way to return, for a few minutes, to the Chicago streets that shaped him. These tastes, far from trivializing his figure, humanize him. They reveal a pope who has not forgotten who he is, where he comes from, or the small joys that made him feel loved and at home. Number 6. He studied in Rome and obtained a doctorate in canon law. On his journey to the priesthood and pastoral leadership, Robert Francis Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, cultivated not only spirituality but also the juridical thought of the Church. After completing his initial formation in the United States, he was sent to Rome to continue his advanced studies in canon law at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, Angelicum, one of the most prestigious institutions in the Catholic world. It was there, among classrooms steeped in centuries of intellectual tradition and libraries laden with Latin treatises, that Prevost developed a profound understanding of the juridical order that structures ecclesial life. He obtained his doctorate with a thesis dedicated to the function of the religious superior and his canonical role in the formation and governance of communities, a topic that already anticipated his future role as prior general and administrator. During his stay in Rome, he distinguished himself not only as a disciplined student, but also as a man of prayer and keen observer of the workings of the universal church. He lived with religious from different continents, and this diversity consolidated in him a global, intercultural, and pastoral vision of ecclesial service. His time at the Angelicum was not an isolated experience, but a comprehensive formation process, where the study of canon law was not a tool of control, but an instrument of justice, communion, and discernment. Years later, this formation would allow him to make complex decisions with balance and depth, both in his diocese and in the Roman Curia. Today, as Pope Leo XIV, his command of the law is not technocratic, but pastoral. He seeks to apply the norms not as an end, but as a means to mercy, truth, and the protection of the common good within the people of God. Number 5. He was appointed Cardinal in 2023. The appointment of Robert Francis Prevost as Cardinal in 2023 was a turning point in his life and, at the same time, a clear sign of the pastoral direction Pope Francis desired for the Church. By then, Prevost was already a bishop with a long history of missionary work in Peru. He had been prior general of the Augustinians for more than a decade, and had recently served as prefect of the Dicastery for bishops, one of the Vatican's most important and strategic bodies. His appointment as cardinal was greeted with joy in Latin America, especially in Peru, where thousands of faithful still remember him as Father Bob, the approachable bishop who walked with them in times of pain, crisis, and hope. His inclusion in the College of Cardinals was interpreted as recognition of a leadership style based on listening, simplicity, and fidelity to the gospel lived in the peripheries. The ceremony took place in St. Peter's Basilica, where he received the red biretta and cardinal's ring from Pope Francis, with whom he shared a pastoral vision marked by synodality, institutional reform, and care for the poorest. His cardinal title was linked to a church in Rome, as is tradition, symbolizing his full communion with the See of Peter. But beyond the symbol, the new Cardinal Prevost did not change his style. He continued to personally answer calls, receive religious without a formal agenda, and walk the halls of the Vatican with the same discretion as always. That promotion to the cardinalate did not distance him from the people, but rather quietly prepared him for an even greater calling. No one imagined then that just months later he would be elected pope, becoming the first American and the first Augustinian in centuries to wear the symbolic tiara of the Universal Church. Number 4. He was prefect of the Dicastery for bishops. One of the most sensitive and strategic positions within the Church's governance is that of prefect of the Dicastery for bishops, the office responsible for studying, proposing, and managing the appointment of Catholic bishops throughout most of the world. In January 2023, Robert Francis Prevost was appointed by Pope Francis to that position, succeeding the influential Cardinal Marc Ouellet. For many observers, his appointment was a clear demonstration of confidence from the Argentine pontiff, who saw in Prevost not only a suitable technical and canonical profile, but also a man deeply rooted in pastoral experience, formed in religious life, and with a keen sense of spiritual discernment. From that position, Prevost had the task of identifying the future pastors of the world's dioceses, assessing their backgrounds, charisms, doctrinal fidelity, and pastoral sensitivity in a time marked by enormous social and ecclesial challenges. His style as prefect was sober, prudent, and meticulous. He avoided the media spotlight and preferred to build quiet but effective consultation networks, integrating the voices of local communities, religious, lay people, and emeritus bishops. He championed a more representative church, capable of embracing the diversity of gifts and cultures without renouncing the unity of faith. He took particular care to find bishops with a sense of community, close to their people, removed from clericalism, and with real experience in missionary contexts. In many cases, he stopped appointments driven by power or career interests, prioritizing humble profiles, trained in listening, prayer, and service. Although his time in office was brief, barely a year before being elected pope, his imprint remains in many dioceses around the world that today have renewed pastors. His time in the Dicastery revealed an essential quality, his ability to look at others and silently recognize those who have the soul of a good shepherd. Number 3. He was elected pope in record time. The election of Robert Francis Prevost as Pope Leo XIV was one of the fastest in the recent history of the modern conclave. Following the unexpected resignation of his predecessor for health reasons, the cardinals gathered in the Sistine Chapel expecting a long and debated process. However, it took only a few votes for his name to reach consensus. In less than 24 hours, the white smoke rose over the Vatican, and millions of faithful around the world listened, with surprise and admiration, to the announcement of the first American pope. What for many was an unexpected turn of events, for others was the logical outcome of a figure who had quietly gained respect for his integrity, missionary experience, serene leadership, and profound knowledge of the universal church. He was not a media figure, but he was a clear conscience in the most demanding circles of the College of Cardinals. The swift support for his election was interpreted as a sign of unity and pastoral urgency. The church was facing serious challenges: a crisis of confidence, internal divisions, a loss of credibility, and a growing need for spiritual renewal without ruptures. His balanced profile, deeply evangelical but not at all ideological, convinced the voters that he was the man capable of building bridges without compromise, of reforming without polarizing. The fact that he was elected in record time was not the product of a political strategy, but of a shared recognition of his suitability. When he first appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, his calm demeanor, his first words spoken in a serene tone, and his immediate call to silent prayer confirmed that the Holy Spirit doesn't need much time when the Church encounters a prepared soul. Thus began the pontificate of Leo XIV, marked from its first minute by clarity, peace, and the conviction of being there not by merit, but by mission. Number 2. He is the first Augustinian pope in over 400 years. With the election of Robert Francis Prevost as Pope Leo XIV, the Order of St Augustine once again saw one of its own occupy the throne of St. Peter after more than 4 centuries. The last pope from this religious family was Gregory XV, elected in 1621. The appointment of an Augustinian as pontiff is not a mere archival fact. It represents the return of a spirituality that has profoundly marked the history of Christian thought. St. Augustine, father and doctor of the Church, not only bequeathed a brilliant theology, but also a particular way of living the faith, with a restless heart, profound thought, and a fraternal life centered on truth and charity. Leo XIV is a product of that school. His formation, his decisions, and his leadership style bear the Augustinian imprint, which privileges dialogue, interiority, the constant search for wisdom, and community love. For more than 40 years, he lived, studied, taught, and led within the Order of St Augustine. He served as prior, formator, provincial, and finally prior general. This journey not only familiarized him with consecrated life, but also gave him an ecclesial vision structured from below. From the local community, shared discernment, and respect for charismatic diversity. As Pope, he has insisted on the need for a church that thinks together, walks together, and loves as a body. He has cited St. Augustine numerous times in his homilies and writings, highlighting his doctrine on mercy, unity, and the personal relationship with God. The return of an Augustinian to the papacy after centuries is more than a coincidence. It is the renewal of a spiritual heritage that places the human heart, thirsting for meaning, at the center of every faith experience. Leo XIV thus represents a profound continuity with the wisdom of Hippo, incarnated in our time. Number 1. He is the first American Pope. With the election of Robert Francis Prevost as Pope Leo XIV, the history of the papacy entered a new chapter. For the first time in more than 2 millennia, the Bishop of Rome and leader of the Catholic Church was born in the United States of America. Born in Chicago in 1955, his election marks not only a geographical milestone, but also a symbolic one. For centuries, the papacy had been strongly linked to Europe, with particular emphasis on Italy, where most pontiffs were located. The arrival of an American pope represents the consolidation of a truly global church, where geographical peripheries become centers of spirituality and leadership. He was not elected to represent a world power, but to embody a synthesis of living faith, missionary experience, governing capacity, and pastoral humility that resonated deeply with the cardinal electors. Being the first American pope also carries a historical burden. Since the country's founding, the Catholic Church has been part of the American social fabric, but often in a minority position, even under suspicion in previous centuries. That a son of immigrants, raised in diverse communities in Chicago, a missionary in Peru, and a servant in Rome, should rise to the papacy, is testimony to a church that has matured in its universal identity and vocation. Leo XIV does not represent the political power of his nation, but rather the more human, spiritual, and simple face of a generation of believers who grew up among neighborhood libraries, baseball stadiums, and multicultural parishes. His election was not a national triumph, but a prophetic sign. The chair of Peter belongs not to one continent, but to the entire world. And in this case, it came from the streets of Chicago, with the serene voice of a pastor who learned to listen before speaking.
Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.